Junho Park sat in his tiny Seoul apartment, staring at his computer screen. The game he was coding looked boring, just like every other day this week. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, and the only sound was the hum of his overworked laptop. It was another Sunday night, and he hadn't spoken to another human being in 3 days. His friends were all busy with their families, girlfriends, or social lives that seemed to exist in a different world from his. The dating apps on his phone had been silent for weeks, and even his mother had stopped calling to ask when he would find a nice girl to marry. That's when the advertisement popped up on his screen. Bio Pet Companion, the future of smart pets. The sleek promotional video showed happy people interacting with what looked like incredibly lifelike creatures. The marketing copy was full of promises that made his heart skip a beat. Your biopet learns your daily routine and adapts to your lifestyle, the website claimed. No messy feeding schedules, no expensive vet bills, no cleanup required. Just pure companionship tailored specifically for you. Junho read the testimonials from other customers. One man from Busan wrote about how his biopet had helped him through a difficult divorce. A woman from Daegu mentioned that her companion had somehow known exactly when she needed comfort after losing her job. The reviews seemed too good to be true, but they all sounded genuine. The price was steep, nearly 2 months of his salary, but Junho had been saving money for months with nothing to spend it on. His social life consisted of ordering takeout and binge-watching old dramas. Maybe this was exactly what he needed to break out of his lonely routine. He clicked through the ordering process, his finger hovering over the final purchase button. The website mentioned that each biopet was unique, developed using advanced artificial intelligence and biotechnology. The company guaranteed that no 2 companions were exactly alike, each one designed to perfectly match their owner's personality and needs. "What's the worst that could happen?" Junho muttered to himself, clicking the confirm button before he could change his mind. The confirmation email arrived immediately, thanking him for his purchase and explaining that his biopet would arrive within 48 hours. The message included a warning about the activation process, something about following the instructions exactly and not being alarmed by the initial appearance of the companion. Junho figured they were just covering themselves legally in case someone expected a traditional pet. 2 days later, a delivery truck pulled up outside his building. The driver seemed nervous as he handed over a large, unmarked black container that was surprisingly heavy. The box was completely smooth except for a small digital display that showed a pulsing blue light. Back in his apartment, Junho examined the container more carefully. There were no logos, no company names, just a simple instruction panel with a few buttons and a biometric scanner. The manual was surprisingly thin, just a single page with basic activation steps and a warning to ensure privacy during the initial setup process. His hands trembled slightly as he pressed his thumb to the scanner. The container hummed to life, and the blue light began pulsing faster. Whatever was inside was about to change his life forever, though he had no idea just how dramatically everything was about to shift. The container opened with a soft hiss, releasing a strange, sweet smell that reminded Junho of flowers after rain. Blue-tinted mist poured out, and he stepped back, expecting to see some kind of robotic animal emerge from the fog. Instead, what he saw made his heart stop. A small figure was curled up inside, surrounded by what looked like thick, clear jelly. At first, Junho thought it might be a very realistic doll or maybe some kind of advanced android. But then the figure moved, taking a shaky breath, and he realized this was something alive. The being was about the size of a 10-year-old child, but clearly not human. Her skin had a soft blue tint, like moonlight on water, and felt cool to the touch when Junho instinctively reached out to help her. Her hair was pure silver, not grey like an old person's, but actually metallic silver that seemed to catch light even in his dim apartment. But it was her eyes that made Junho's hands shake. They were huge, taking up nearly half her face, and colored the most beautiful violet he had ever seen. When she looked at him, those eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably real. This wasn't a robot or a sophisticated toy. This was a living, thinking being. The girl tried to sit up, her movements weak and unsteady. The biogel slid off, her skin like water, leaving her completely clean but shivering. She wore what looked like a simple grey garment that covered her small frame. As she became more aware of her surroundings, her violet eyes grew wide with what Junho could only describe as pure terror. She scrambled backward in the container, pressing herself against the far wall, and began speaking in a voice that sounded like music. The words meant nothing to Junho, but the melody of her speech was hauntingly beautiful, like a song played on instruments he had never heard before. Even in her fear, her voice carried tones that seemed to resonate in his chest. Hey, it's okay, Junho said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. I'm not going to hurt you. The girl's musical speech became more urgent, and tears began flowing down her blue-tinted cheeks. She pointed at herself, then at him, then around the room, clearly trying to communicate something important. Her fear was so obvious that Junho felt his own heart breaking. He had ordered a pet, and somehow received what appeared to be an alien child. Junho grabbed a blanket from his couch and slowly approached the container. The girl flinched but didn't try to run when he gently wrapped the soft fabric around her shoulders. She was trembling, whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "Where did you come from?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. "Him." The girl looked up at him with those incredible violet eyes, and for a moment the fear seemed to fade. She tilted her head, studying his face with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was trying to figure him out, just as much as he was trying to understand her. She spoke again, softer this time, and pointed to her own chest. Then she pointed to him and made a questioning sound. Even without sharing a language, Junho understood that she was asking who he was, and maybe more importantly, whether he was going to help her or hurt her. "I'm Junho," he said gently, pointing to himself, "and I have no idea what's happening, but you're safe here." Over the next few days, Junho watched in amazement as the alien girl picked up Korean at an incredible speed. It started with simple pointing and gesturing. He would hold up an apple and say apple in Korean, and she would repeat it back perfectly, her musical voice somehow making even ordinary words sound beautiful. By the second day, she was putting together basic sentences. By the fourth day, she was speaking almost fluently, though with a slight accent that made her words sound like they were being sung rather than spoken. "My name is Nari," she told him one morning while they shared breakfast. Junho had been giving her small portions of his food, carefully watching to see what she could eat safely. So far, she seemed to handle most human food just fine, though she particularly loved anything sweet. "Nari," Junho repeated. "That's a pretty name. It means lily in Korean." She smiled for the first time since arriving, and Junho noticed that her teeth were slightly sharper than human teeth, but not in a scary way, more like they were designed for a different kind of food than what humans ate. "My people are called the Stellar Wanderers," Nari explained, her violet eyes growing sad. "We have traveled between stars for many generations, always moving, always searching for peaceful places to live." Junho set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "Why are you always moving?" Nari's expression darkened, and she pulled the blanket tighter around her small shoulders. "Because of the destroyers. They are a race that conquers worlds and enslaves anyone they don't kill. They have been chasing my people for longer than I have been alive." She explained that her people had found temporary refuge on a planet called Haven's Rest, where they had lived peacefully for several years. Nari had been born there, in what her people thought might finally be a permanent home. "But the destroyers found us again," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "They came with huge ships that blocked out the sun. Everyone had to evacuate quickly. Families were separated. Children lost their parents. Parents couldn't find their children." Junho felt his heart break as he listened to her story. This small girl had lived through something no child should ever experience. "The evacuation ships were overcrowded," Nari went on. "There wasn't enough space for everyone. The adults decided that the children were most important, so many of us were put into emergency stasis pods and sent away on different ships." She explained that the stasis pods were designed to keep her people alive for months or even years if necessary. The plan was to hide the children among cargo shipments to various planets until it was safe to reunite families. "But something went wrong with my pod," Nari said. touching the crystalline structures on her temples that Junho had noticed before. "These are my connection ports. They help me interface with technology. During the journey, my pod's navigation system failed, and instead of reaching the refugee safe house, I ended up in your human shipping network." Junho stared at her in disbelief. "So you were accidentally shipped to Earth and somehow ended up being sold as a pet?" Nari nodded sadly. "The smugglers who found my pod probably thought I was some kind of exotic animal. They disguised the stasis container as one of your human products and sold me." "What about your family?" Junho asked gently. Tears began flowing down her blue cheeks again. "I don't know where they are. I don't even know if they survived the attack." Junho threw himself into learning everything he could about caring for Nari. He spent hours online, searching through medical databases and alien research forums that he never knew existed. Most of the information was useless speculation, but slowly he began piecing together what she needed to stay healthy. The first breakthrough came when Nari started looking pale and weak after her third day with him. She was eating the food he gave her, but something was clearly missing from her diet. Junho noticed her touching the walls of his apartment, running her fingers along the metal fixtures and electrical outlets. "I need minerals," she explained, weakly when he asked what was wrong. "My people absorb certain elements through our skin. Without them, we become sick." Junho researched frantically and discovered that many of the minerals Nari needed were actually sold as supplements for exotic reptiles. He ordered magnesium compounds, trace metals and mineral salts from pet supply companies, mixing them into a paste that Nari could absorb by touching it to her palms. Within hours of her first mineral treatment, color returned to her blue-tinted skin and her violet eyes regained their brightness. But the real surprise came when Junho was struggling with a particularly difficult section of code for his latest game. He had been staring at the same bug for 3 hours, growing more frustrated by the minute. "May I try?" Nari asked quietly, approaching his desk. Junho was about to explain that programming was very complicated, but something in her expression stopped him. He moved aside and watched as she placed her small hands directly on his laptop screen. The crystalline structures on her temples began to glow with a soft blue light, and suddenly his computer screen filled with scrolling code that was moving, faster than any human could read. Nari's eyes were closed, but her fingers moved across the screen as if she was actually touching the data itself. After just 2 minutes, she opened her eyes and smiled. "I think I fixed the pathfinding algorithm and optimized the memory usage. Your characters should move more naturally now." Junho stared at his screen in amazement. Not only had she fixed the bug that had been driving him crazy, but she had improved the entire section of code in ways he hadn't even thought of. The game ran smoother and looked better than it ever had before. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "My people have always worked closely with technology," Nari explained, settling into the chair next to his desk. "We can interface directly with electronic systems. It's how we've survived traveling between stars for so long." Over the following days, Nari became Junho's unofficial programming partner. She would touch his computer and instantly understand what he was trying to create, then offer suggestions that made his work 10 times better. But more than that, she seemed to genuinely enjoy helping him. Junho found himself looking forward to their daily coding sessions. Nari would curl up in a blanket next to his desk, her presence somehow making his small apartment feel less lonely. She asked thoughtful questions about his games and offered creative ideas that he never would have considered. In return, he taught her about human culture, sharing his favorite movies and music with her. She particularly loved Korean dramas, though she often predicted plot twists episodes before they happened. "Your people's stories are beautiful," she told him one evening. "They remind me of the tales my grandmother used to tell." As weeks passed, Junho realized that protecting Nari had become the most important thing in his life. Junho couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong with the company that had sold him Nari. The more he thought about it, the more suspicious everything seemed. A real pet company would have customer service, return policies, and proper documentation. Biopet Industries had none of these things. Late one night, while Nari slept peacefully on his couch, Junho began digging deeper into the company's background. What he found made his blood run cold. Biopet Industries barely existed on paper. Their website was professionally designed, but all the contact information led to dead ends. The company address was a vacant lot in Incheon. The customer reviews he had read before purchasing were all posted on the same few days, probably written by the same person. But the real horror began when Junho found encrypted forums on the dark web where people discussed exotic acquisitions. The conversations were coded, but the meaning was clear enough. Biopet Industries was selling captured alien beings to wealthy humans who wanted unusual pets or research subjects. "Dear God," Junho whispered, reading through message after message. Some buyers were complaining that their biopets were too intelligent and wouldn't stay in cages. Others were asking for advice on keeping their purchases sedated. A few were actually trying to sell their pets to military research facilities. One message made Junho's hands shake. "The blue-skinned ones with the crystal markings are worth the most. Their hacking abilities are incredible. Military contractors will pay millions for a live specimen." Junho looked over at Nari, sleeping peacefully with her silver hair spread across his pillow. Those crystal markings on her temples weren't just decorative. They were exactly what these monsters were looking for. He spent the next several hours learning everything he could about the trafficking operation. Biopet Industries was apparently a front company that intercepted refugee ships and stasis pods, then sold the survivors to humans who had no idea they were buying sentient beings. The worst part was discovering that most of the aliens didn't survive long in captivity. They were kept in inappropriate conditions by owners who treated them like exotic animals. Many died from improper care, while others were sold to laboratories for experimentation. "Junho?" Nari's sleepy voice made him jump. She was sitting, up on the couch, her violet eyes reflecting the light from his computer screen. "Why are you awake so late?" "I couldn't sleep," he said, quickly closing his laptop. But Nari's expression told him she could sense something was wrong. She walked over and placed her hand on his computer. Her temple crystals glowed briefly, and her face went pale as she accessed what he had been reading. "They're selling my people," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. Like animals. Before Junho could respond, Nari's crystals began flashing rapidly. Her eyes widened in alarm as she pressed both hands against his laptop screen. "They're coming," she said urgently, her voice trembling. "I can see tracking signals in the local network. Biopet Industries has been monitoring this area, looking for their missing product." Junho felt his stomach drop. "Missing product?" "Me," Nari said, tears streaming down her blue cheeks. "They know I'm here. According to their internal communications, a retrieval team is already on the way to collect me." She showed him the data streaming across his screen, GPS coordinates, surveillance footage from nearby security cameras, and communication logs between Biopet operatives. They had been watching his building for days, waiting for the right moment to move. "How long do we have?" Junho asked, already reaching for their emergency supplies. Nari's crystals flickered as she accessed more data. "The team is 20 minutes away. They're planning to pose as delivery workers and break down your door." Junho grabbed his emergency backpack and started throwing essentials inside. Bottled water, energy bars, the mineral supplements Nari needed, and his laptop. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely zip their bag closed. "We need to go now," Nari said, her crystals still glowing as she monitored the approaching team. "They're in the elevator." Junho had lived in this building for 3 years and knew every corner of it. Instead of taking the main hallway, he led Nari through the building's maintenance areas. They squeezed through a narrow service corridor that connected to the basement parking garage. Just as they reached the basement, Junho heard heavy footsteps and rough voices echoing from the floors above. The men weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. "Fire exit?" Junho whispered, pointing to a door marked with emergency signs. They slipped outside into the cold Seoul night, just as flashlight beams began sweeping through the basement windows. The city's underground tunnel system had always fascinated Junho. Seoul was built on layers of history, with old subway tunnels, utility passages, and forgotten bunkers creating a maze beneath the streets. He had explored many of these tunnels as a teenager, back when urban exploration was his hobby. "Can you track us down here?" Junho asked as they descended into an abandoned subway station that had been closed for renovations. Nari placed her hand against an old electrical panel, her crystals flickering weakly. "Their tracking equipment can't penetrate this deep underground, but I'm having trouble accessing the surface networks from here." They moved through the tunnels by the light of Junho's phone flashlight. The underground passages were cold and damp, filled with the echoing sounds of their footsteps. Nari pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders as they walked. After an hour of walking through the maze of tunnels, they found a relatively dry maintenance room where they could rest. Junho shared his water and energy bars with Nari, but he could see that she was struggling. "I need my mineral supplements," she said weakly, her blue-tinted skin looking paler than usual. "And I haven't been able to absorb electrical energy properly since we went underground." Junho realized that Nari's species didn't just need the mineral paste he had been giving her. She also drew energy from being near electronic devices, which explained why she had always seemed healthier when sitting next to his computer. "The tracking team is still searching the surface," Nari reported, pressing her palm against a junction box on the wall. "But they're expanding their search pattern. They know we're somewhere in this area." For the next 2 days, they played a deadly game of hide-and-seek through Seoul's underground. Junho used his knowledge of the tunnel system to keep them moving, while Nari hacked into security cameras and traffic systems to monitor their pursuers. But the constant stress and poor conditions were taking their toll on both of them. Junho was exhausted from carrying their supplies and navigating the dark tunnels. Nari was getting weaker, without proper nutrition and energy sources. "I'm slowing you down," Nari said, as they rested in another abandoned maintenance room. Her violet eyes were dim, and her hands trembled as she tried to interface with a damaged electrical panel. "Don't say that," Junho replied firmly. "We're in this together." But privately, he was terrified. They couldn't hide underground forever, and Nari's condition was getting worse every hour. He had to find a way to get her proper help. But everywhere. They went on the surface. The corporate soldiers seemed to be waiting. The hunters were closing in, and time was running out. By the 3rd day underground, Nari could barely walk. Her silver hair had lost its metallic shine, and her violet eyes were so dim that Junho worried she might not survive another night in the cold tunnels. "I have to risk going to the surface," he told her as she lay curled up in his jacket, shivering, despite his efforts to keep her warm. "You need proper medical supplies, and I need to find us a real place to hide." Nari tried to protest, but she was too weak to argue effectively. Junho had been researching on his phone whenever he could get a signal, learning about underground markets where people sold medical equipment with no questions asked. He left, Nari hidden in the maintenance room with strict instructions to stay put, then made his way to the surface through a utility exit in Itaewon. The area was known for its black market connections, and Junho had found contact information for someone who claimed to sell exotic pet medical supplies. The dealer was a nervous man named Kiwoo, who operated out of the back room of a pet shop. When Junho explained what he needed, IV fluids, mineral supplements, and portable medical equipment, Kiwoo's eyes lit up with greed. "That's going to cost you," Kiwoo said, naming a price that was nearly all of Junho's savings. "And I'll need cash only." Junho emptied his bank account at 3 different ATMs, his heart pounding every time he had to show his face to a security camera. By the time he had gathered everything Nari needed, he had spent almost every one he had saved over the past 2 years. Kiwoo also put him in contact with someone who rented safe houses to people who needed to disappear for a while. The woman, who called herself Minseo, operated several small apartments around Seoul that were specifically designed to avoid detection. "No questions, no records, no problems," Minseo assured him as she handed over keys to a basement apartment in Hongdae. "Just pay weekly in cash and don't cause trouble for the neighbors." Getting Nari to the safe house required careful planning. Junho used service tunnels to move her closer to the building, then waited until late at night to carry her up to street level. She was so weak that she couldn't walk on her own, and Junho's heart broke as he felt how light she had become. Safe house was small but clean, with thick walls that would block most scanning equipment. More importantly, It had reliable electricity that Nari could use to restore her energy levels. For the first time in days, Junho felt hopeful as he set up the IV drip and watched color slowly return to Nari's skin. She slept for nearly 12 hours straight, while he monitored her vital signs and researched ways to contact other members of her people. But their peace didn't last long. On their second night in the safe house, Nari suddenly sat up straight in bed, her crystals flashing. "Urgently." "They found us," she whispered. "Multiple teams surrounding the building." Junho looked out the window and saw unmarked vans parked at both ends of the street. Men in dark clothing were moving into position around the building, carrying equipment. That looked far more advanced than normal police gear. "How many?" he asked, grabbing their emergency supplies. "At least 12, Nari replied, her hand pressed against the wall as she accessed the building's electrical systems. "They're jamming communications and have thermal imaging equipment. There's no way out." That's when everything changed. As the corporate soldiers began breaking down doors on the upper floors, something extraordinary happened. Nari's crystals began glowing brighter than Junho had ever seen them, and every electronic device in the building started going crazy. "I can't control it," Nari said, her voice filled with panic and power. "My defensive systems are activating." Suddenly, every light in the district went out. Traffic signals failed, car alarms started blaring randomly, and cell phone towers crashed, one by one. The power grid failure spread outward like ripples in water, affecting an area covering several city blocks. In the chaos and darkness, Junho and Nari escaped through the building's emergency exit. But as they ran through the powerless streets, Junho finally understood what the traffickers really wanted. They weren't just selling alien pets, they were weaponizing beings who could shut down entire cities with their minds. After the power grid incident, Junho and Nari had to move constantly. Every few days, they changed safe houses, using different routes and staying in areas where Nari's abilities were less likely to accidentally cause problems. The corporate soldiers had expanded their search and wanted posters with Nari's description were being circulated among security companies throughout Seoul. "I think I can reach my people now," Nari said one evening as they settled into their fourth safe house in 2 weeks. Her health had improved significantly with proper care, and her crystals were glowing steadily again. "My defensive systems are stable enough to attempt long-range communication." Junho watched as Nari connected to every electronic device in the small apartment, his laptop, the television, even the refrigerator and microwave. Her crystals blazed with intense light as she channeled power through the network, reaching out across vast distances to find others like her. For hours, she sat motionless with her hands pressed against multiple screens, her consciousness somehow traveling through global communication networks. Junho stayed nearby, ready to disconnect everything if the strain became too much for her. Finally, just before dawn, Nari opened her violet eyes with tears streaming down her face. "I found them," she whispered. "There's a refugee network operating from a hidden base in the mountains outside the city. Other stellar wanderers who escaped the traffickers. They've been searching for missing children like me." Over the next few days, Nari established regular contact with the rescue network. The communication had to be brief and carefully encrypted to avoid detection, but slowly they learned about the extent of the trafficking operation and the ongoing efforts to rescue captured stellar wanderers. "A rescue team is coming for me," Nari told Junho after one of her communication sessions. "They'll be here tomorrow night. They have a ship hidden in the mountains that can take me to a safe colony world." Junho felt his heart sink, even though he knew this was the best possible outcome for Nari. She would be safe with her own people, away from the traffickers and the constant danger they faced on Earth. "That's wonderful," he said, forcing a smile. "You'll finally be safe." But Nari's expression was troubled. "They want me to come alone. They say it's too dangerous to involve humans in our operations." The next evening, 3 stellar wanderers materialized in their safe house using some kind of advanced camouflage technology. They were adults, taller than Nari, but with the same blue-tinted skin and crystalline temple markings. Their leader, who introduced himself as Elder Taemin, spoke perfect Korean. "Young Nari," Elder Taemin said gently, "we have been searching for you since your pod went missing. Your family will be overjoyed to know you survived." My family. Nari's eyes lit up with hope. Safe on Colony 7, the elder confirmed. Your parents and grandmother made it to the evacuation ships. They never stopped believing you were alive. Junho felt overwhelming relief and happiness for Nari, but also a deep sadness that he tried to hide. She would be reunited with her real family, which was exactly what she needed. It's time to go, Elder Taemin said, gesturing toward advanced transportation devices his team had brought. We must leave before the human authorities detect our presence. But Nari didn't move toward the rescue team. Instead, she walked over to Junho and took his hand. I won't go without him, she said firmly. Junho is my chosen family now. In our culture, that bond is sacred, more important than blood relations. Elder Taemin looked confused. Child, humans cannot survive the journey to our colonies, and this one is not of our people. He saved my life, Nari said, her voice growing stronger. He protected me when no one else would. He spent everything he had to keep me safe. He is family to me now, and I will not abandon family. Elder Taemin studied Junho with intense violet eyes, clearly trying to understand what kind of human would risk everything for a lost alien child. The other two stellar wanderers whispered among themselves in their musical language, occasionally glancing at Junho with expressions of curiosity and respect. This is highly unusual, Elder Taemin finally said. Humans are not typically invited into our communities. Your species has a reputation for being unpredictable. He's not unpredictable, Nari said firmly, still holding Junho's hand. He's loyal, he's kind, and he's proven that he values life over profit, which is more than I can say for most of his people who have encountered mine. Junho felt overwhelmed by the situation. Just months ago, his biggest worry had been debugging computer code and finding ways to fill his lonely weekends. Now he was being offered a chance to join an alien community that most humans didn't even know existed. What would that mean exactly? Junho asked. If I chose to stay with Nari? Elder Taemin exchanged glances with his team before answering. We have been establishing safe houses and rescue operations on several worlds, including Earth. The trafficking problem is bigger than we initially realized, and we need people who understand local customs and can move freely among the human population. He explained that the Stellar Wanderers had been working to build a network of allies on different planets, people who could help rescue captured refugees and provide safe passage to colony worlds. But on Earth, they had struggled to find humans they could trust. Most humans who discover our people either try to exploit them or report them to authorities, Elder Taemin continued. But you risked your safety and spent your resources to protect Nari. That suggests you might be someone we can work with. The choice wasn't easy. Junho would have to give up his old life completely, his apartment, his freelance work, even contact with his family and friends. The Stellar Wanderers would provide him with a new identity and resources, but he could never go back to being the lonely game developer he had been before. If I stay, Junho asked, what happens to Nari's real family? Won't they want her back? Nari looked at Elder Taemin hopefully. Can we visit them? I want to see my parents and grandmother, but I also want to stay with Junho. That can be arranged, Elder Taemin said after a moment of consideration. Colony 7 is only a few days' travel by our ships. You could visit regularly while maintaining your work here on Earth. Junho looked at Nari's hopeful face and realized there was really no choice at all. This girl had become the most important person in his life. She had given him purpose and shown him what it meant to truly care about someone else's well-being. Choose family, he said simply. 6 months later, Junho stood in a converted warehouse in the mountains outside Seoul, watching as Nari helped a newly rescued Stellar Wanderer child learn to use human technology. The warehouse served as a processing center where rescued refugees could recover their strength before being relocated to safer worlds. Junho's official title was Human-Alien Cultural Liaison, but in practice he did whatever was needed, teaching rescued aliens about Earth customs, helping them access medical care, and coordinating with the few trusted humans who supported the rescue network. The new arrivals are settling in well, Nari reported, walking over to where Junho was reviewing supply lists. She had grown several inches taller, and her crystals now glowed with steady confidence. The little ones especially loved the Korean cartoons you introduced them to. Junho smiled as he watched alien children laughing at animated shows on tablet. Computers. The warehouse was filled with the sounds of different species learning to communicate with each other, creating a unique harmony that he had never imagined possible. "Any word from your parents?" he asked. "They're planning to visit next month," Nari said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They want to meet their daughter's chosen family properly." Junho had given up his old lonely life and gained something infinitely more valuable, a purpose that mattered and a family that chose to love him. In a universe full of different species and distant worlds, he had learned that the most important bonds were the ones people chose to make with each other. Their unconventional family had proven that love truly could transcend any boundary, even the vast distances between star cities.